Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Michaela Peters. This is my last trip in my Around the World series. No, but seriously, this is kind of cool. I have now been in more than 50 countries under the age of 30, and that feels like an accomplishment, and I'm going to take a break from this for a while, so that's cool too. We had this issue, and I had just explained this on the Russian side as well, where I booked someplace that never ended up confirming it. Then I didn't realize this, so we got here and had to book something last minute, which I think actually worked out and ended up being not super expensive. It was on this Hotel Tonight app thing, and I mean, it's pretty nice. I decided, you know what, I'm going to justify balling out since this is going to be my last trip for a while that I'm aware of that I'm going to take. Yeah, that's kind of everything with that. But anyway, trying to keep the Finnish side of my channel going, and sometimes I'm trying to come up with new topics, and I'm like, okay, I feel like I've talked about that a lot already. So if there are any POVs that you want to know from the American perspective about living in Finland, let me know. Because it's like all of them I try to think about, like the sauna thing, I feel like I've already talked about, the finding a job thing I've already talked about. I'm probably going to start targeting international people living in Finland and speak more about that stuff, and I actually did finally get like one paid partnership. Cool. I'm just trying to figure out where to put it in these videos because it's more so having to do with having access to health insurance. So maybe this would apply to you if you're watching this. I just have a feeling it doesn't. So that's going to be a separate kind of thing, like series to launch into. Yeah. But we were just discussing with my friend over here about how like I've been wearing the same outfit basically this whole time, and I was like, well, I'm changing my shirts underneath and everything else, so yeah, but it do be like that when you're traveling. So these are the things I'm not going to necessarily miss about traveling. But yeah, so today I think I wanted to talk a little bit about American mentality stuff versus Finnish mentality stuff in terms of being raised and what I've observed the differences are and, you know, how I think those things go. And I'm a weirdo and I keep my books in bags when I'm traveling to try and not mess them up, which happens anyway. All right, so I'm still reading this. This is like my favorite book. This is honestly my favorite book that I've ever read. Yeah, I already messed this part up. Ugh. Okay, so I've like finished reading half of it. But, you know, I'm going to quote my one friend who I think always says the insightful stuff. And he said, you know, from a young age in America, you learn how to compete against each other. In Finland, from a young age, we learn how to work together. And I think that that is so true. And I kind of always felt like growing up in the U.S., I felt kind of like a show pony or something. Like I didn't really feel like a child. And maybe that's a little bit dramatic. And I always think it could be worse. There was sort of this... I did not make up this joke, okay? This is a joke about, I guess, Jewish people living in the U.S. because, you know, there are a lot of those. And apparently you can either be a doctor, a lawyer, or a failure if you're Jewish. So, you know, at least I'm not that Jewish because that could be stressful. But I mean, yeah, there are legitimately some families where it's like everybody's college educated and they all have these crazy good jobs. And, you know, I'm lucky I like at least didn't really come from that, right? It's like I'm one of the only college educated people in my family. Part of that would also have to do with a lack of emphasis on the college education with like how I grew up religiously. So there's also that kind of controlling variable there. So I'm not really sure if that's a fair comparison, but in general, just I want to speak to like the cultural aspect of it, not necessarily just my experience, because I do think a lot of it is you grow up and there is this innate sense of competition that just kind of exists. Like I'm going to talk more specifically about high school at this point, and because this is kind of like where my mind goes when I start thinking about like the actual competition stuff. Like I'm sure it was ingrained from a younger age, but I remember it being a lot more explicit when I was in high school. So you have college sports, you know, that people try to get scholarships for and stuff, but you have high school sports that are kind of, you know, preparing you for the college sports if you're good enough to get into them. And, you know, that is competition in and of itself. Now, I really liked doing high school sports, so I shouldn't necessarily complain, but I'm just trying to explain that does foster a spirit of competition or a sense of competition or whatever you want to call it. The other thing that's very bizarre that they do in America is this thing called class rank. So you are in a class, like a graduating class, right? Mine had 268, and you get a rank every year starting after your freshman year. So you go in your freshman year, your junior year, your sophomore year, I for some reason felt like I only got 3 ranks, because basically I started at rank 20 and then I got down to rank 16 and I stayed at 16, I think, until I graduated. And it's really awkward because then people talk about the class ranks and everybody knows who is ranked where, because you have the valedictorian and the salutatorian, and then I think those are the ones who give speeches at graduation. So that's how that works. And I felt bad for the girl who was valedictorian because everybody just kind of secretly hated her. I guess because they were jealous of her. And like, you know, I still remember who was ranked where because it was just so important, right? But I was also like in the more competitive classes, whereas I think people who are more in like the, like, let's say not advanced placement classes as they're called, like that's the one where you can take the test and get college credits and blah, blah, blah. Like it's probably like nobody really cared about their rank or wanted to know. The reason why knowing my rank was important is because I was in this program that allowed me to get free community college education with the top 15% in my graduating class. I think I was like top 5% or whatever. Doesn't matter. But it was really a big issue that I was going to community college, because community college is generally not for, you know, people who are like, because I started thinking about this concept of like winners, right? Like people are, and I do really feel like the US is kind of like a winner takes all system, because it's like basically you're made to feel like if you are not like, you know, this upper echelon of society, like you don't deserve to be there. And I just don't agree with that. And I kind of wish we could focus on being more like inclusive of all the roles and like not looking down on like other people for doing other things. Like my grandmother would always say growing up, like, you know, the people who work at McDonald's or the people who work, you know, at the grocery store, wherever, like we need them too. And no, I agree. It's just the thing that really sucks about that whole situation is that, like, you know, and this is one of the things that like I really like, it pains me to think about. It's like, you know, the people who are working at those places are not being paid a livable wage that they can actually like, yeah, live off of. Whereas in Finland, I'm not worried that the person working at the grocery store can't afford an apartment and can't afford healthcare. Whereas I am worried about that in the US. And then it's like, I don't even know what kind of situations these people are in, and it kind of scares me to think about it. Like, it's just, it's uncomfortable and it's sad. I don't know. Like, yeah, so I think, okay, because I'm trying to think of how to like segue into this, because I guess, all right, so just kind of finishing the thought about, you know, the competition. It's like, you know, even my friends, like my close friends, would be like, oh, well, what'd you get on that test? And then you're like always comparing your grades. And like some of it was to make sure that you were like in range and didn't do exceptionally bad, but some of it was to like make sure that you were doing better than the person next to you. The problem was I had better grades than a lot of my friends, not in everything, but like in some stuff. And they didn't always like that very much. And I was like, I'm not competing with you guys. I'm just trying to get free college. Because I also knew that like going into high school, I remember my dad told me like, if you work hard enough, you'll get to go to college for free. And I was so incentivized by this that I was like, as I say, sacrifice my entire life force to try to get good grades and be well-rounded, right? This well-rounded thing's really important, like the doing sports and stuff, or like being in clubs. I just did the sports and the good grades thing. And so, you know, that did help me have a pretty good, let's say, college career. Like I got like a ton of scholarship money. My college was relatively cheap, and that was always something like I took a lot of pride in and felt good about. And like to a Finnish person, this is like, what the heck are you talking about? Because we don't pay for college. And if anything, you're trying to stay in college for as long as you can because of the benefits that you're getting. So it's a very different situation. And, you know, like even when I think about like going to like a US university versus like studying at a Finnish university, it's like, it's just not the same, okay? Because the other things that happen, like when I went to a 4-year university in the US, is like you're being graded on a curve. And then I joke, but not joke, that like all the Chinese international students are taking all days in the class anyway. So, you know, me, the American, I'm like tough out of luck there. Yeah, it sucks. Yeah, so like even that is just like competitive. Whereas in Finland, that's not really a thing. The other thing that I think is really cool, so again, going back to in Finland, you learn to work together from a young age. The thing I really admired about being like around Finnish students is how like you could call this, like in some ways this could be seen as cliquey, but it's just like they're very into like forming these groups and like trying to like get people involved in the groups and organizing these activities. And it's funny because I always say like Finnish people move in a unit. You'll just see like 20 students all walking together. That's like very weird. Like we don't have that level of organization among Americans. I feel like people are too individualistic. And so it's kind of like Finland's like this weird crossroads between people being very, you know, individualistic on one hand with the whole like sisu thing, as I mentioned, or just like feeling like they need to like handle things on their own, being like a little bit shy to ask for help. But on the other hand, like they really like their like community and systems and structures like that involve other people, and that's very different than the individualism thing that we're still seeing in the US. So that's why I kind of always would joke that like Finland's this kind of weird mix between like a collectivist culture and an individualistic culture, because there is still a very high emphasis on the way that an individual actions affect the rest of society, right? You see this in terms of like high taxes and people being more or less okay with that. Even I joke the thing all the time is like jaywalking in the street. Like people are going to look at you like you're crazy if you do that. Like that's kind of not okay. So yeah, just like this maintaining the social order thing or meeting the status quo maybe feels like a little bit more important in Finland, but at the same time, Finnish people mind their business. So like I feel like when it comes down to certain individual decisions, people are not necessarily going to like care. Whereas in the US, I feel like I could see people not minding their own business and kind of, you know, trying to understand why you're doing something a certain way. So yeah, it's like Finland is really good at like, I was very impressed with all the student stuff and like the amount of like creativity and time and effort that would go into organizing these different student events, whether it's like sits parties or like I had gone to a conference one time. Now, the other downside to this is that a lot of this, there's a very heavy drinking culture association with a lot of the student events. And I think that's not a surprise. Like that's kind of a known fact. Like I will call it a fact that is a challenge that exists in the Finnish university situation. So like I remember explaining like, I'm like, oh, I'm going on this trip to like Stockholm because it's a student rate and it's cheap and I get to go there on a cruise. And then like my one friend is like, okay, like why is that a big deal? I was like, you don't understand. We don't have these things in the US. And I think that they do. They're just like not as discounted. Like I guess they do have them, but it's like those are for like the rich kids or the people who are not sensitive to spending money. I don't know who those are for, but my biggest thing was I'd travel for like, a running club meet. One time we went to like Illinois or something, or Michigan, I don't even remember, somewhere in the Midwest, 10 hours on a bus. Yeah, so we would travel to different states sometimes for that stuff. So it's kind of weird because like I think I liked the novelty of the different things I got to experience as a Finnish student, but at the same time it was so contrary to how I grew up with like everything being very competition oriented. And if you want to remove the competition, it's like very like you're maybe even competing against yourself. Like I want to have better grades, like I want to have better running times, like I want to be better at this sport. Like whereas that kind of stuff in Finland, like this continuous I don't want to say continuous improvement, but this continuously needing to like reach higher and higher levels of success, like it's not the same thing. Like I think in Finland, like people have been taught from a very young age, not even just to work together, but to be content with what they already have. And, gratitude is good and cool and stuff, but when you're trying to reach new levels of whatever, it's not always like being complacent is not always very useful. And so this is kind of the debate that once you start talking to people about like, what you do or don't like about Finland, they'll start bringing out these other sides of the argument. And it's like, at that point, to me, it's just like a preference system because, like, I think objectively, like, both countries are not bad options for places to live in, and both are going to have their own challenges and set of problems. And as I say, everything is a problem. You just pick your set of problems. Like, my life in the U.S. has problems in a way that my life in Finland doesn't, and vice versa. They're just simply different problems. But now, bringing this into the book recommendation, the thing that I found super interesting, because I read, I don't read in order because it's not how my brain works. So I read the very end of the book, which is the part that's talking about a brief history of why the U.S. consumer thinks the way they do. And this was so fascinating because this went into the history. Like, this was so cool that I just feel like sharing this. It goes into the history about how in the post-war years, when they were bringing back all the GIs and they started doing all these GI programs and trying to get everybody into single-family homes, nobody wanted to live in their parents' basement. I was reading this and I was like, I wish I lived during that time. Like, why am I alive right now? Or why am I the age I am right now? I don't like it. Okay, but anyway, like, basically, the government did this thing where they were able to get people to start spending money. They were also able to start manufacturing more things, and these are that was during the whole let's get a washing machine or a dishwasher and all the household appliances and getting very into that stuff. But then women were also entering the workforce and the interest rates were really low and people were able to buy homes, but they were also manufacturing homes. And like people, and this is what I remember saying this one time, is that the problem with the US is you cannot actually tell how wealthy or not wealthy somebody is because everybody has all the same crap, like all the same stuff, right? Like we all live in a house, we all drive cars, we all have a MacBook. Like how am I supposed to know who is wealthier? Whereas like, you know, if I see a Russian person with a MacBook, let's say, like I know that well, first off, MacBooks are way more expensive in other countries than they are in the US, okay? Sometimes I'm like, oh, this country's cheaper. Maybe a MacBook here would be cheaper. No, it's not, okay? And then you're looking at like different salary ranges there. So that kind of like, that I could see being a little bit different. But in the US, no. Like everybody has the same stuff, but then we have easily available credit. And so this was another thing, is that like debt and credit, like that has risen a lot, but it has not stayed consistent with the ability that people have to pay it off. And then the other thing is the gap between like the credit and like there kind of was this point in the post-war economy where people were making about the same amount, like not exactly the same amount of money, but like everybody, it's not even just everybody appeared to have the same stuff. Everybody's financial situation was like more or less similar. But then it started, you know, doing that thing where it's like the rich and the poor and like the growth of the 1% and then everybody else. And it just got out of hand. And then everybody's thinking like, oh, well, I still need to have the same stuff as the next guy. And then the keeping up with the Joneses began. And I think that began a little bit more in the 60s or 70s, whereas like the post-war stuff was like, you know, late 40s onward. So yeah, I mean, it was kind of a problem. And the example that they use here is like, you have the guy living in New York, in Manhattan, who's making $600,000 a year as an investment banker. And then you have the entry level whatever guy who's, I don't know if it was entry level, but whatever. He was doing business something or another that was not investment banking. I don't know, whatever it was, different business jobs in Manhattan. And he was making $80,000 and he's looking at the $600,000 guy and is like, well, his kids go to private school and they have these nice houses and they have this nice car and I want to do all that too. So the guy does do all that, but he's doing it on credit that he can't really at some point afford. And then, you know, we get into bankruptcy and all these other things. And so this has been kind of the issue, is that Americans have maintained this mentality in general of, I deserve to own and have the money as the like, you know, show that I have all the same things with the same money as the person next to me, when in reality that's not really what their bank account reflects. And you know, I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind, is that like in America, right? Because I think other countries, like I'm gonna say, have processes that don't necessarily facilitate this as easily. Like, you know, it's a lot harder to look like your lifestyles are the same when your income levels are not. But yeah, it's just like this idea of, and this is kind of maybe the thing I get frustrated sometimes with Americans, is just like there's large emphasis on how things look and not how things are. And it just feels really like fake and disingenuous sometimes. And it's just like not the vibe I get in Finland or from Finnish people. So yeah, you know, I'd say that it's like, it's not even just competition. It's like keeping up with this appearance of something, and it drives me crazy. And, you know, I'm not going to say it's everybody, because obviously it's a very diverse nation, but I think that's one of the things that has been created is like, you know, people come to the US and like even people from like my understanding at this point is that people will come from like, you know, poor countries like Mexico, I'm going to use as an example. And it's like just the fact that like you are in Mexico, or you came from Mexico and you're now in the US, and it doesn't matter if you're a dishwasher at a restaurant, the fact that you are like in the US, it's like you are like better than all your family in Mexico. I don't know where this mentality exactly like that I discovered it came from, or how I caught on to that, but yeah, so it's like just, oh, things look cool and good because it's America. And it's like, I don't know, it's just like a flashy thing with a bunch of crap underneath of it. I don't know what else to say. And I think a lot of Europeans do know that, but the rest of the world doesn't. And they never will until they immigrate. One time, my one friend whose dad immigrated from Afghanistan, he was like an asylum seeker, said that the U.S. is kind of like a light bulb attracting a bunch of flies, and then they don't really realize it until they get there, that it's not what they thought it was. And I'm going to leave that on that note. All right, try to keep making videos, and if you have more questions, let me know, because sometimes I can't think of videos, but somehow I still do, but then I feel like I'm repeating myself and they're not very interesting. All right, so thank you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm going to keep adding that now. I'm really trying to hit 10K before I leave Finland, but I only have a month to do that, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. All right, thank you, everybody. Bye.